to the Near Memo, a weekly conversation about search, social, and commerce. What happened, why it matters, and the implications for local. All right, welcome to episode 15 of the Near Memo. I'm joined as always by Mike and David. I'm Greg, since I didn't say last names. And as always, we talk about the most interesting things that happen in the world of local commerce, social media, and there's a ton of news, but we focus in on three particular major items during this podcast. And David, you're up first, I think.
Sounds good. I wanted to talk about the not super recent, but just very exhaustive Future of Commerce report from Shopify. And given that it's coming from Shopify, sort of not surprising that it highlights the ongoing transition from offline to online purchases for local and small businesses. It seems to me to be a sort of an amalgamation of about 6 different reports that Shopify's done over the last year. And it interviews both consumers or had surveyed both consumers and businesses. Number of interesting data points. I think for me, the one that jumped out the most, which is clearly a little bit of a sales pitch for Shopify, but pretty impressive. Shopify's retail merchants replaced 94% of point of sale sales lost in the first 6 weeks of the pandemic with online sales. So just amazing that if you were already using Shopify POS and had an online version of your store that was ready to go when the pandemic first hit, you saw a fairly minimal disruption to your business. And I don't know that that's necessarily specific to Shopify. I would think that would apply to any business that had a good e-commerce experience that was, previously doing a lot of offline sales, that they lost a lot less business during that initial wave of COVID. Greg, you were going to say something. No?
Well, I was just going to say, I suspect that 94% number is high. It may be true for Shopify customers, but I think it's high as a general, it's a general matter. That's Shopify calling Mike right now.
Thanks for the plug.
Yeah.
So the other,
you checked
the
the
other
mail.
Interesting.
It's my wife. I have everything shut off, but she's allowed to get through. So
we'll have to invite Dara on our next Near Memo. So the flip side of that coin I thought was interesting is Shopify almost doubled new signups in between the first quarter of last year and the second quarter of last year. They were up something like 71 or 74%. And so, certainly merchants who weren't on an e-commerce experience, were clearly looking to one of the category leaders to get themselves online. So I thought that was pretty interesting. The consumer data I also thought was interesting. It was not as dramatic of a consumer preference for online during COVID as I would have predicted. Young people sort of led the way. I want to say 2/3. One of these stats showed that 2/3 of young people sort of preferred the e-commerce experience. It was less than 50% of folks over 55. And so the generational thing, sort of not surprising, but I would say that the extent to which the preference for online, it wasn't pervasive during COVID is kind of interesting. And all of these, curbside pickup and making an appointment to shop in store and all these things, there was a significant minority of consumers express preferences for these sort of newer shopping behaviors, but it wasn't a majority. And I'm really curious to see, I hope Shopify does some of these same surveys on some of these same questions, in the second and third quarter of this year of 2021, to be able to compare, how permanent are these sort of behavioral shifts. I think that's going to be really interesting. And then the other piece, which is going to be a segue into Greg's.
Can I just make one comment on that? There was an interesting article in Retail Dive that Greg mentioned earlier that in terms of best practices around these new things. And they noted that buy online and pick up in store, where there's some sort of, you order it and then there's some sort of delivery system in the store, like a dispensary or something, has really fallen by the wayside, largely driven by COVID. But I think the premise of the article was that its death is probably permanent, thus limiting, for example, browsing behaviors that consumers have. So it'll be interesting to see if something like that comes back post-COVID, or whether curbside has permanently sort of axed it from the choices.
I would guess you're juxtaposing buy online, pick up in store, and curbside. I would guess not that curbside is going to totally eliminate buy online, pick up in store, but I think retailers will deal with it individually. There was another interesting stat that I saw from the Shopify report that was talking about. I tweeted about it earlier. They said that where there was a local delivery option or local pickup option, those shoppers converted at higher levels than those doing traditional e-commerce with an e-commerce shipment to their homes. And I thought that was really interesting as well, because I guess that goes to the immediacy of that's kind of like an in-store shopping experience. There's an immediate gratification, or you get the product immediately. I also thought it was a good report with lots of really interesting data. Which do you want to talk more about the report, or should I segue into my topic?
I'll say one and a half more things. So just to piggyback on that, availability of local delivery, increasing conversion rate. I guess I would kind of see that as the permanent takeaway from COVID sort of shifting behaviors, that it may not be, that all of these sort of curbside pickup, local delivery, these things may not be necessarily table stakes moving forward, but you are going to lose some share of customers just from a lower conversion if you don't offer them as part of your checkout or purchase experience.
Right. And I think the theme of all of those is convenience, customer convenience, right? I mean, I think people like the choices. They like the convenience of those options. I had Whole Foods delivered this morning because I was, just a busy day and I can't get to the store. It doesn't mean I'm not going to go to the store, that forever, I'm going to prefer delivery, but it's a great option to have as the circumstances dictate.
And then,
do you think that this multitude of delivery options will put stress on a lot of these small businesses? I mean,
absolutely. I mean, small businesses are not set up. Even the big retailers are not. They're not set up to do like 10 different things. They can do 2 things, And so this is the challenge: is figuring out what's going to be the most effective. Where do they place their bets?
For sure.
But they have to do something.
I know that I've probably gone over my time, so I am going to segue to you briefly. But the other really interesting data point was around this desire among consumers to support local and independent businesses. I was shocked at the country level differences in that sentiment. So Spain and
I don't remember seeing that. Tell me.
Spain and the U.S. were 1 and 2 or 1 and 3 or something like that, with 74 or 72%, a very high percentage of consumers expressed an interest in supporting small and local businesses. Japan was down at like 25% or something like that. So it's a really wide range of this notion of consumers wanting to support small and local businesses. And I was happy that for all the businesses that I work with anyway, that American consumers kind of have this innate preference for it. But it's not necessarily true in other parts of the world. So I'll segue on that note.
I suspect if we drilled into that, if there was some kind of qualitative interview component, you'd see more nuance there, and the way people may have interpreted questions. I bet you there's more to that story. But consistent with all of that, the thing I wanted to talk about this week is what I'm sort of calling the pandemic paradox, which is, as you expressed, David, the massive growth in e-commerce, online shopping that we've seen again and again from Adobe and from all the big data sources. Over 2020, triple-digit growth. But then this other thing that you're just talking about, which is this strong preference, emotional preference for independent businesses, small businesses. And how do these two things kind of coexist, and what's really going on? Because people want to buy and support their communities, want to buy locally, but are spending tons of money on Amazon. And it's kind of true in my house too. I mean, philosophically, I'm all in with local businesses, but I'm not actually spending that much money with them right now. I'm buying from Whole Foods. I'm buying from Amazon in many cases. And I think, as I said in one of the earlier newsletters this week, I think the reconciliation of that is what Shopify is doing, is bringing that kind of convenience and digital tools and digital capabilities to these small businesses. If you make it easier for consumers to do business with small businesses, they will. But that has to happen. Otherwise, they're not going to do it. They'll just default to Amazon.
I think that there may be another logical explanation for all of this. Where I live, there's just not much product choice. I can't find the type of sneaker I need locally. Doesn't matter. Can't order
what
it.
type of sneaker is
Well,
that?
I need a high support wide 9. 9s are not that common anymore.
I thought you were gonna mention some kind of fashion forward design or something.
With all of your work with
I-
Aaron Wikey, I thought for sure he could send you one of his 6,200 collectible pairs. So
Yeah, he tells me that's his retirement. I said, no way, because you're just going to salivate over them until your deathbed. So he's not going to ever sell them. So how could it be his retirement? Anyways, I need a special type of sneaker because I pronate a lot. Can't find them locally. I buy those from Amazon. And I think but if you extend that logic to other commodities and many other products, I think what has to happen is small businesses need to move into areas of combinations of products and services, of unique offerings, of experiences. And I think in the end, the solution is that they don't compete, because you can't really compete with the efficiency of somebody like Walmart or Amazon, picking up a product someplace else in the world and delivering it to your door.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, in fact, though, most small businesses are service businesses. We tend to focus on retail, but the majority of small businesses are services. And so there isn't, that's a kind of a bright line in many cases between things that can be physically
or
shipped.
even something like jewelry where every piece is unique, right? Where you can't
that's a hybrid. That's a kind of a hybrid.
To me, fashion, furniture, jewelry, anything in those kind of categories, I feel like there's still a very strong place for local businesses to succeed. In many cases, you want to feel and touch and see it up close, before you purchase. So, there's the whole, back to our buy online, pick up in store kind of thing. There's sort of, using online to kind of get people in the door, and then syncing that experience, I think, is going to be critical.
Yeah, I totally agree. And one of the other items in today's newsletter and Friday's newsletter is the idea of sort of bringing the store experience online. It sort of arises in the context of sort of these fashion-related, beauty-related kind of augmented reality and video demos and interactions with humans. But I think that's going to be, I think that's kind of consistent with what I'm saying, is you've got to bring more of your digital, you got to bring the digital game, much higher. And also the marketing becomes really critical for these small businesses, because people will buy from them if they know they exist. And very often you don't know where you can buy a certain product. You don't know who's selling something. So if you give people access to the information, make it visible to them, that will also change their behavior. I mean, one of the reasons why people buy it from Amazon is because they know they can get the thing from Amazon. But if I knew that the bike gloves that I wanted were available, in my neighborhood, I would go down there and get them, or I'd call and, buy them on the phone or something.
I was just going to point, not that any small business needs one more thing to think about, but I really see loyalty programs as, that is a table stake now for a lot of local and small businesses. Just thinking back on your Whole Foods experience you shared, 10 minutes ago, you have loyalty to Whole Foods because of your previous in-store experiences, and that one or two times where you actually need something delivered to you, that they're top of mind for you because of those earlier experiences.
Well, but also one of the reasons why it's easy to shop from them is because they have my whole friggin' shopping history there. And so creating a shopping list is really fast. And I don't even have to, they remind me of everything that I bought before, right, as an upsell. Bananas and apples and horseradish and hummus and whatever,
very healthy, much
whatever
healthier
I'm buying.
than our family.
Well, we buy unhealthy stuff too, but it's all there, and the whole history is there, and it's just super easy. There's just, it's really the path of least resistance. So I think there's a lot of complexity in this conversation, but consumers are ready to buy from independent businesses if they can find out who can deliver the service or the product, and some of these digital capabilities or the omni-channel stuff is made available. So we're going a little long this week, but that does not mean, Mike, that you should shortchange your very interesting and important discussion about Google and Yelp and the growth of Google reviews, which was a really great article that you can read in our analysis section.
So just to summarize the analysis, it was a case study I did of a moderately large fast casual chain in the South, Southwest, and Southeast areas of the United States, over 200 locations. And I followed the history of their reviews from 2013 to the present across the sites that they were appearing on, TripAdvisor and Yelp and Google and Facebook. And, clearly Yelp was struggling in this and Google was clearly dominating in this segment. I had the honor of being criticized for somewhat by Rand Fishkin. Obviously, it's always nice to be criticized by somebody who has 500,000 followers. Maybe I can get his attention again. But he noted that my article didn't tell the whole story of local reviews, doesn't point out some of the things that Google did, in terms of their utilizing their monopoly power to force local businesses to get reviews on Google. And I felt, that Rand's assessment was way too simplistic. And the reason I didn't include that in it, because I don't think that it is the driving force in the storyline. I think one is that it's much more complex. There are many markets, and I'm doing another piece of research which shows how it happened, how it was different in a sit-down restaurant. But so it's more complex than just Google being a bad guy. Admittedly, they have a monopoly, and they may have used that monopoly to disadvantage Yelp intentionally. But during the last 10 years, the prevailing legal theory has been the Bork theory, which is really Bork, no matter how you interpret it, but that the consumer welfare was the only consideration in antitrust, and the issues of controlling the broader economic and political power, business versus business, was irrelevant. So Google was operating under the prevailing legal framework, and you can't really blame them for maximizing their opportunity in that, right?
No, that's the logic of the market, and their shareholders will punish them if they don't, in fact, do that.
Exactly. So going back and retroactively saying they were bad, in fact, you could argue that Google was actually good. They made it easier for consumers to read reviews, to leave reviews, to get summaries of reviews. And certainly they made it better for business by helping businesses by sending a gazillion free leads their way.
Well, the irony is that in this particular case, monopoly simplifies everybody's life, right? It organizes the behavior of businesses in particular, but also consumers. It just focus on Google direct. You did that whole study of the Google only marketing strategy for that restaurant and was quite effective. And so this actually helps the small business owner because they can disregard all the other sites, right?
Right. And the problem with Rand's logic, which I may be summarizing this incorrectly. If I am Rand, you can correct me. But that Google was a monopoly. They use that to disadvantage their competitors, and therefore they've misused their monopoly power and are therefore bad. That's the basic of what I considered his criticism. But like you just pointed out, Google does what Google does, right? This is what businesses do. This is what we've honored in entrepreneurial capitalism. Building moats and creating monopolies is an honored activity. But the problem with Rand's criticism is that what you really need to do is look at the more systemic question of the theory of antitrust. You need to broaden it, obviously, but it's hard to broaden it and go back and say they were bad then, and they're not, you need to broaden it to include what they include in Europe and then change it at the systemic level, making clear guidelines so Google knows how to behave going forward if they did in fact do what Rand suggested, which is force businesses to get more reviews on Google, which I find is a really strained argument.
As did I. I think, still to this day, many years after this trend was well underway, that most businesses don't ask customers for reviews at all. Right. It's not like Google, it's not like Google is sort of forcing themselves to be the only game in town when it comes to asking for reviews when most people aren't even doing that. I would also, Mike, I would just echo your consumer harm argument. I really don't have any sympathies for Yelp in this particular spot because, as you said, Google not only made it easier for people to leave reviews, their filter is far less penal than Yelp's is for new reviewers, which I think is important. But I also have to think they did consumer research, and if consumers really did want these War and Peace length tomes that Yelp espouses as, somehow indicating that their reviews are higher quality, air quotes, I think Google would have enforced that in their own platform. But I think that they've done a really great job, in my opinion, from a product standpoint, of encouraging these sort of shorter form reviews, but also pulling out the most germane pieces of each of those reviews, highlighting them with justifications, for example, underneath business names in a 3-pack, those kinds of things. And we just haven't seen Yelp, pivot to that sort of more structured, shorter form, more democratic, small d, democratic, review corpus. And I think that's an example of Google responding to what consumers want as opposed to intentionally harming them. So.
Right. And as Greg's pointed out, consumers want recommendations. They don't want to have to read all these reviews top to bottom, bottom to top, and make a decision. They want a recommendation, which whether Google's doing it well or poorly, that's what Google's trying to do with a 3-pack. They're saying, here are the 3, pick.
Well, interestingly, years and years ago, the first time I met with Yelp, I don't know when it was like 2005, maybe. Jeremy Stolpelman I think they were on Market Street in San Francisco. It was a small office. It was in the very beginning, and he and I talked about, and I don't know if this was these were his words or if this was sort of my characterization of what he was saying, but he was talking about Yelp being like a food blogging platform. It was like akin to a blogging platform for foodies, right? People who are really into restaurants and wanted to write sort of wax eloquently about their restaurant experiences. And that sort of initiated the culture of Yelp and the Yelp reviews as being these long form things. And also the Yelp Elite Squad, which was one of their early successes that helped propel them and helped them sort of win versus competitors at the time. Also, I think reinforced that, that there was a sort of a cadre of top tier, elites who were writing these very lengthy reviews that were really not for ordinary people. They were really for themselves. It was a kind of an insider's experience. And that some of that has persisted to the present day, and it's kind of out of step with what people need and want, especially on mobile devices, which is where most of their traffic resides now.
So as a final closing note, I do have another article coming up, which points out that a company like, oh God, I can't even think of it. The reservation company. OpenTable can succeed in this same context where Yelp is failing. And that to me demonstrates both the fact that it's more than just the review. The review isn't just it's just a feature. It's not the product that Yelp is trying to make it that you described, that businesses and consumers need something bigger for it to succeed. And my article will point out that they have succeeded in spite of Google, in spite of Yelp, because they've done something that businesses needed. So,
well, I mean, in their case, they came out of the gate with this reservation system, and the reviews support the decision making, support the reservation system. It's a totally different relationship.
Right, exactly, and that's what I'm saying is that a review is a feature, not the product. And Yelp tried to make it the product, and in doing so, led them down a path where they could not compete with companies with better ideas, better customer service, better execution. And to a large extent, this particular situation is Yelp's fault. I think Google you can't hold Google harmless, but I think that this is a dynamic interplay of consumers, businesses, the market, the law, and it doesn't stand up well to Rand's simplistic critique.
And thanks to this week's sponsor, Google.
Might be the only.
Well,
No, that's not a real thing. We don't have any sponsors. There are no
might be
sponsors.
one of the.
I'm talking to Jeremy Stoppelman
Yeah,
right
that's
now.
It might be one of
Get
the
off.
few positive Google near memos that this podcast puts out. So.
I'm just kidding. So, all right. So that was an upbeat note to end on. We got to end as long as while we got some, some positive vibes going here. All right. So, up and to the right, onward and upward, all
Always
of that.
great to talk to you guys, and thanks everyone for listening.
Yep.
Thanks for joining David, Mike, and Greg. To stay on top of the latest developments in local, subscribe to our newsletter at nearmedia.co. We'll see you next week.